Welcome back once more. If you're just joining us this Sunday morning, this is Sunday edition, Kenya's only Sunday morning political show. We are dissecting some of the big political stories in this country. 3 days to that repeat presidential election on Thursday, the 26th of October 2017. And let's switch gears now and talk about the Electoral Commission itself. Has been at the center of much attention, a lot of political pressure from both sides of the political divide. Ofula Chebukati, the chairman of the commission, has been speaking, trying to make his voice heard as the chair of the commission. Did speak last week, but he has been also lashing out at politicians, saying that political players should avoid meddling in the affairs of the commission.
Fair and credible election. As the referee, I want to issue a stern warning to the players of this game on all sides that they should stop all attempts to interfere with the process. Failure to do this will result in consequences, as I've made up my mind to uphold the Constitution and the will of the people of Kenya, regardless of threats, intimidation, and pressure. No one side is absolved from this, and that's why my warning goes to all parties involved. Let my commission and I do our job, and we shall deliver. Interfere as we have been doing, and we shall get stuck as a country.
So Chebukati issuing warnings to the political players. The political players have not left him alone, though. Let's listen to the Deputy President, William Ruto.
We will not succumb, so to speak, to their attempt to delegitimize 26th. Not because they have any issue, but because they know they cannot win. You know, that's really the bottom line.
Commission and their preparedness, and those words you were speaking about, the political players issuing, warnings to them. The Deputy President, what is it? Let's finish that conversation on efforts to legitimize 26, as he says, by NASA. And when you went on the break, Dismas, you had a very burning issue.
You see, the burning point is for Mr. Chebukati. He now says that he's giving yellow cards. One wonders, when did he realize that he was supposed to give these yellow cards? Did it occur to him that he needs to give yellow card after Dr. Kombe has resigned? That's number one. Number two, when did he realize that himself plus the other commissioners are merely robots? That when they go for a boardroom, a full plenary conversation, whatever issue that comes to play is going to be automatic. 4 people will be voting for one particular position, and according to his statement, if you're able to decode his body language, that it's going to be a Jubilee position, and the other 3 are likely to take his position, and people assume that it's a NASA position. When did he realize this? And when he's issuing those threats, what are we supposed to do as Kenyans? Are we supposed to go to church and pray for him, or do we expect him to come up with a concrete action? In my view, Chebukati is all sizzle and no steak. You go to a restaurant, you do not understand the menu very well, you order for a meal, it comes sizzling. When the steam is off, you discover it's a small piece of meat.
So
that's what Chebukati is all about.
All the blame squarely on Chebukati's shoulders. Do you think that he is to blame for all that's happening in the country, that the political players have no part to play in it?
Chebukati is the leader of IEBC. He's a lawyer, understands he's got the qualities of becoming a Supreme Court judge. So when he applied for this position, one assumes he knew what he was getting into. And when you get to a position, especially in the public sector, you are unable to deliver. You do the best thing as Dr. Komba has done. You resign, you go back home, take a shower, start enjoying coffee. So for him, he comes here and he tells us he's not able to deliver. What are we supposed to do? Then why can't he resign now? Because you see, he's behaving like a member of a civil society, which is poorly funded. What does he expect the players to do? When you're a referee, as we've indicated earlier on, you're supposed to be very firm. You're supposed to be very firm, very strict. But here is Chebukati telling us, oh, this team has got 14 players, this one has got 9 players, what do you want me to do? He's got everything, and if he's unable to understand the Constitution, if he's unable to understand the interpretation of his decisions, why can't he go to the Supreme Court? And you recall he indicated, as well as Dr. Kombe, that you have a tragedy at IEBC, that the lawyers who work at IEBC, when they're giving him advice, it's always partisan advice. And it seems to be the case that the lawyers IBC has retained always give partisan advice. So you're beginning to wonder, how did they select their panel? Who selected those lawyers for them?
Let's move this conversation forward. Let's talk about some of the scenarios that could be facing Kenyans, that could be facing Wafula Chebukati as he prepares for that election in the next 3 days. And one thing that was said that many people have been talking about is that that press briefing that he gave towards the end of last week, those warnings he did issue were a preamble to a possibility of him actually resigning, as Dismas just said there. Let me come to you, Bonameso. You've been a bit quiet.
Yes.
What would be the scenario if the chairman of the IEBC, Wafula Chebukati, were to resign today? Is that a possibility? And where would that leave the election from where you sit?
If Chebukati wants to resign, it is his right to resign. However, as a Kenyan who is mandated to give free, fair election, as he has stated, he should actually concentrate on his duty. These sentiments that we are getting from him that my emotions have not been done what, it is upon himself to stand as a leader, as a chairperson of that commission, and say, this is what I'm instructing. This is what I deem fit that we should do in order to give free, fair, credible elections to Kenyans. Because, Mr. Ben, I want to tell you that sometimes people say rule of law. You know, one of the management failures is strict rigidity to the rule of law. So Chebukati must act sometimes as a manager. He is required to dictate, and that is one of the managerial characteristics. Or a manager should be firm. So Chebukati, what she'll do, not resign, because it will be a coward person to do that. He should continue, hold elections strictly to the rule of law as per the Constitution.
All right. Mutinda, from where you sit, is that a possibility for Kenyans, Wafula Chebukati is resigning?
Now. This is really going to be, you see, already one commissioner has already resigned. That means that it's something that you cannot rule out. But the question is that really going to be of help? And as per the reasons that they've given, are the reasons they are giving a justification? Because from the reasons I've listened, the former commissioner giving and the chairman, it's like they are simply not comfortable with the decisions not going their way. And that is making them very, very uncomfortable. But the thing is, they as a commission have a way of decision making. Are they following those rules and laid down procedures for making decisions? Because it's like, let's take the case of the Supreme Court. Yes. It's like Njoki Ndongo or Juang resigning because the majority judges ruled in a different way. And I don't think that is how you do things when you are together as a corporate body. If you've decided that there is a way of making decisions, then when you don't have it your way, I don't think that is enough basis for you to get out, for as long as whatever decisions that have been reached, as much as you might not be in agreement with them, followed the due process as laid down by your own rules. So I personally would not advocate for Chebukati to resign, but in the very likely event, I would say unlikely now that he seemed to be giving signals that he might actually do it, then we will have to deal with the situation the way it is. I've heard lawyers talk about the doctrine of necessity. Yes. And some of the amendments that were in Parliament that are yet to be assented to by the President had something to do with that. Because unlike very many other constitutional bodies, I do not know what happened. It must have been something of, I don't know why we did not have that clear provision that in the case where, like for instance in the Supreme Supreme Court, it is very clear that the Chief Justice is going to swear in the President. And in the event that the Chief Justice is not there, then the Deputy... Yeah, I do not know why, as Kenyans, we omitted that and left the duties of the chairman alone. That would probably be what we will have to deal with, which has been addressed by the amendments. And again, there is what we also call the doctrine of necessity, that now that is not there, there has to be someone to do it. Probably those are the things that would be invoked. Yeah.
All right, Husband, what are your thoughts on this issue, the potential possibility of Wafula Chebukati resigning as commissioner?
I think what Wafula Chebukati has thrown in enough hints is that if political interference continues, he is going to throw in the towels, and it is every Kenyan's wish that he doesn't do that. And I think what Kavemba is saying is also something that raises critical questions, that when people are in a panel and the vote goes against you, do you then resign? Listening to Dr. Roslyn Akombe and Wafula Chebukati, it's a bit clear that Roslyn Akombe did not resign. Wafula Chebukati is not coming out to speak against this interference because the votes go against them. They're actually coming out to speak, and Roslyn Akombe resigned simply because the vote was not based on any serious conviction, any reasoning. It was politically influenced from outside IEBC. And I think they've made that point clear. And therefore, the issue of vote and whatever is not so much of an interest as the fact that this plenary, that is the commission, seems to be operating via other powerful forces. And until we deal with that, I think whatever they've given us and whatever is in the public domain still will raise so many questions. But I think having said that, it's also important to go back to what does the law say and how does the law then come into bear in all this. Now, if the laws are made in parliament and parliamentarians are politicians, do we then stick with the rigid requirements of the law even though we know that the certainty of sticking to that is not clear? We might plunge ourselves into more serious problems. Or do we seek a political solution? Because it is clear that there is political interference. And what IEBC and Chebukati are trying to do is basically take it back to these politicians who are interfering with the process. And the moment we get to understand that there is a political discourse that is going to shape how this law is going to be adhered to with strict fidelity, then I think Kenyans will be very comfortable going into an election. And let us not forget that even the constitution that we celebrate today, it was because of a political process just before the 1997 general election. Because all these things started with the IPPG. And no one was looking for Nusumkati when they were talking about IPPG. There was no Nusumkati after the 1997 general election. But instead, there was IPPC. And if you trace back the steps of the current constitution that we have, it is from IPPG and IPPC. So even if we go through a political solution, it doesn't mean that the guys in NASA want to be part of a Nusumkati government. It doesn't mean that they fear losing an election. It simply means
the question that has been raised,
Hesbon,
is that they're choosing the wrong time, maybe, from those people who have been saying that, to try and effect these reforms, like it was done in 1997, that this is not the time for reforms, it's the time to conduct an election. I think
you know, that question depends on where you are. If this is not the time, then do we know the consequences of not, having the necessary reforms that will ensure free and fair elections? The fact that we don't know in itself is more dangerous.
All right. Mark?
You know, what I find very interesting is lawyers, professors, doctors have sat down to discuss whether a returning officer should sign a Form 34A or not. And after they sign it, whether they should transmit it via Kim's kit. This is what I call the nation of Kenya is obsessed with discussing nonsense. The fact of the matter is this: it is very easy to do this election because what went wrong is so simple to solve. It's called do your job. When a returning officer refuses to sign, surely, is that something we should have a national debate about? We know what format a Form 34 should be. We know what format through which to send the results through. So the problem is this, that we are politicizing a very simple threshold constitutionally. If you look at that ruling very carefully from the Supreme Court, what they're basically telling the IEBC is you had a set of laws, and internal mechanisms by which to ensure a free, fair, and credible election. The Supreme Court simply said, stick to them. And when you look at them in fine print, it is simply a matter of transmission and accurately signing forms. That's it. What are we discussing? What are we saying? If you listen to Chebukati, he said, if politicians can step away on either side, what does he mean? If politicians can stop organizing for people to attack the IEBC, if politicians can stop over this over litigious nature that we have right now, he'll be able to deliver a credible election. Because I can tell you for free that this last election in August 8th was not messed up because of a huge deficit in terms of what was supposed to be done, but it was simple little areas that an unsigned Form 34, a Form 34 that did not tally with the results.
So that was the only problem?
Yeah. So it's a very simple problem, and I don't know why we keep debating.
All right, back to the question then. Very, very interesting points you raised there. But what if Chebukati was to resign today? Would that then mean that Uhuru Kenyatta must sign the amendments to the electoral laws?
Unfortunately, you cannot apply the law backwards. If he resigned today and Uhuru signs tomorrow, the law would not apply to his resignation today. So, if Chebukati does resign, unfortunately, we will not have an election. That's the truth of the matter, because that election will not have a returning officer. And that's a very important thing for Kenyans to know, that Chebukati holds the only authority as per currently legislated. He's the only one who can say so and so has won the election. So without a returning officer, there can be no election. So we pray and hope that Chebukati stays in office, because if he resigns today, I'll tell you for free, there's no election.
Dismas?
You know, Ben, there are two things that we must not run away from. Number one is our national security, and number two is our national prosperity. Those two things are so important. That's what keeps Wanjiku awake in the middle of the night. And the person holding the key to those two issues is Mr. Chebukati. Now, from the time Chebukati issued his statement a few days ago, if he now believes that he's been able to sanitize IBC, that Chiloba has gone on leave, maybe Chiloba was the issue as to why we can't have a free, fair, and credible election, is on leave, that he can deliver a free, fair, and credible election, by all means, let's go and have the election on 26th, so that we are done with this business of election.
All right.
Because if you're not very careful, we'll keep on having an election every 60 days till the cows come home. That's number one option. Number two, if he believes he cannot deliver a free, fair, and credible election, again, we'd like to give him two options. And I'm not going to use Mark's word that I'm going to give him for free, because he already knows. Tomorrow morning, he does a news conference with or without the other commissioners, because it's now very clear there is a lone ranger in that commission. He indicated all the commissioners do not want to listen to his proposals. Not because those proposals are so scientific or anything, but they don't want to listen to him. And from his conversation, it seems the case that wherever there's a plenary taking place, everybody's mobile phone is very active. They're taking instructions from elsewhere. Because you fail to understand, if you're going to a plenary and you're supposed to engage in a very solid brainstorming session, you've received orders from the Supreme Court and now you're supposed to run the election. Why can't the commissioners think on their own motion? Why must they be responding to external forces? And maybe it's time for Chebukati to stop tiptoeing around issues. He needs to tell us tomorrow, who are these external forces? Let him give those names, the external forces, so that we know who are these cartels holding the country hostage. So he needs to do that tomorrow. Call a news conference, call off the election, or if he doesn't have the guts to reveal this information, because you know Kenya is a very tricky nation, you could reveal this information and the next time you are nowhere to be seen, then he just resigns.
All right.
And he takes a walk. Now, there's no way we can get into a constitutional crisis or a political crisis, as the people seem to suggest, because it's very clear, and this point is not palatable to NASA, that President Kenyatta is still in office. So there'll be no power vacuum. And then all of us go to the Supreme Court or we go to the High Court, then we get directions on how to run. Because I'm very disturbed with what Maka said, that you find a returning officer, a presiding officer, he fails to sign a form. That's the crux of this matter. It's because of failure to sign those forms. It's their failure to respect the Constitution. It's the ability to manipulate numbers that has brought us where we are today. So every single era of commission or omission done by anybody within the entire chain, from the chairman to the cook at IBC. Maybe those are the cooks who release those memos. It's important for everybody to be held into account. We cannot afford to joke with our national interest or our prosperity.
All right.
And you know, Ben Kitili, as we tiptoe around these important issues, our neighbors are now laughing all the way to the bank. Look at what is happening in Ethiopia. They're about to overtake us. Look at Tanzania. Even look at some of our banana neighbors, Burundi. They're about to overtake us. We're becoming the laughing stock. And Esbon has indicated...
Let's be kind to our neighbors.
Yeah.
Neighbors.
In East Africa. Esbon has indicated something that should keep everybody worried. If they think that Chebukati's position is just a walk in the park. Because we can discuss here till the cows come home, but we don't know what is going to happen on 26th evening.
That's true.
If these elections goes on without Mr. Raila Odinga's participation.
All right. You're watching Sunday edition here on KTN News. Thank you for staying with us. Let's take another quick commercial break. When we return, we'll talk about their preparations as the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. The first batch of ballot papers did come in yesterday. They were inspected by the IEBC. We'll talk about that. And of course, they are set to have a meeting tomorrow. And another thing that is a possible scenario on the 26th of August of October this year is that Wafula Chebukati, and he has alluded to that, the IEBC could choose to not have elections in some parts of the country and have those elections later, that election in those areas later on. What is the viability of all that? We'll discuss that and more next.